What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down each of the main card fights from this fantastic UFC 281 event that we've got coming up this weekend. We're going to be taking a deep dive into each of these matchups from a betting perspective, and hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions and maybe even earn some extra cash. And if you really like these breakdowns, you could also find breakdown videos on my website mmabettingtips.com for all of the prelim matchups on this card. There's a link for that in the description below. You could also see it here in the background, as well as finding breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card. There's a VIP chat room where you could talk to me. I'm online like 8 to 10 hours a day, talk to me about upcoming fights, betting strategies, all that kind of stuff. And I also post every single one of my MMA bets on this website, from over-unders, prop bets, money line bets, the whole 9 yards. Pretty much all of them are profitable over the long term. And yeah, I think you'll like it, so check it out. Before we get into the breakdowns, just want to let you guys know that I am not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice, and it is very important to gamble responsibly. It is brutally difficult to make money betting on any sport, and MMA is no exception. I know that when you go on social media, you can get a very different perception of reality, because it seems like everyone is profitable, right? Everyone seems to be making money online, but it is very, 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 very difficult. You see these guys on Instagram with big diamond chains, flashy watches, Gucci tracksuits, driving Bentleys, and all they do is post pictures of themselves with loads of money in fancy hotel rooms and give off this perception that it's so easy making money betting on sports that anyone can do it. The reality is that it is brutally difficult and takes a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of years of experience. I'm literally chained to my desk for 8, 9, 10, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, in order to be profitable in this game. It is very, very difficult. So if you're not putting in that level of work, very unlikely you will be profitable. So remember, it's a very difficult game we're playing, but all the information that I am going to be sharing with you in this video comes from a lot of experience, a lot of hard work. I've put a lot of time into researching these fights this weekend, and everything that I'm going to be talking about in this video is coming from things that I've just seen, researching and watching recent fights over the last week. So the information is coming from a good place, a lot of experience, and I have been making money betting on MMA a very long time. Been making a living from live betting UFC for a very long time. So like I say, the information I'm sharing comes from a good place, know what I'm talking about, and I hope you find this information very useful. Before we get into breaking down the very first fight that I want to talk about, I also just want to quickly, very, very quickly, for anyone that's interested, just share my quick thoughts on the crypto market at the moment, because this week, I'm sure you're all aware that we've seen the collapse of a big crypto exchange, FTX, which is going to have a massive impact on the world of crypto. And, where crypto moves over the next few months, right, what price action is going to look like. I've been really passionate about crypto, really deep into crypto since 2017, that huge bull run that we saw back in 2017. And so within that time, I've seen two pretty big boom and bust cycles. I saw the big bull market of 2017, and then the crash that came in 2018 and 2019, and then I've seen the big bull run in 2020 into 2021, and obviously the crash that we're now seeing in 2022. So I thought, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not giving you financial advice. I don't know where the future's heading or what crypto is going to do in the future, but I would just give you my thoughts based on what I've seen play out over the last 5 years, give you guys, a perspective that comes from a lot of experience if you haven't been in crypto that long. I know a lot of people jumped on crypto in this latest bull market, and as a result, right now, as you see the prices on crypto dip, and you see some people online, some crypto influencers telling you, to go buy the dip. You see other people maybe not in the crypto space saying that, crypto's a scam. This is the final nail in crypto's coffin. This is the death of crypto. And you're probably sat there wondering, what the hell do I do if I hold crypto? You maybe feel a little bit helpless right now, and you don't know who to believe or what to think. And I know you probably feel like that, because I was in the same situation as you guys back in 2017. I bought into the hype, bought into the huge bull run back in 2017, made a load of money, and then gave most of it back in the bear market that followed in 2018. And a big reason why I gave back most of my gains is just because of a feeling of helplessness. I didn't know what to do, didn't know what to think. I was clueless. So I'll just share with you how I see things, right? If you're sat there right now not knowing what to do, thinking about buying the dip, thinking about cashing out forever because you're sick of getting wiped out and scammed with different crypto projects and exchanges that fail, what I would say is there's a lot of people online right now saying this is the death of crypto. The final straw is never coming back. I strongly believe those people are wrong. I think crypto has a very bright future. I am incredibly bullish on the future of crypto, and I think there will be opportunities to earn generational wealth even in the next bull market that, is probably only maybe 6 months to 2 years away. Who knows when it's coming, but these things move in cycles and crypto will bounce back eventually. So I think the people saying crypto is dead are very, very wrong. We've been through this many, many times in the life cycle of crypto before. You look at like the Mt. Gox situation, and crypto always bounces back. Markets are just cyclical. At the same time, those people, those crypto influencers on Twitter telling people to go out and buy the dip right now or are still bullish on crypto are very foolish. Because if you learn about support and resistance and how price action, often reacts to support and resistance, you can see that there's two very, very clear levels here on the Bitcoin 2-day chart, daily chart, weekly chart, whatever you look at. The long-term time frames show two very clear levels, and you can see price action here is currently floating around 17,200 at the time of recording, and I've drawn with the horizontal blue line a very, very clear level can be seen at the previous major all-time high from back in the 2017 bull run, which is approximately 19,200. The way the support resistance works is once you close a daily, weekly, 2-day candle below that level, it often means that the trend is going to continue in that direction and will continue to move in that direction until it reaches the next level of support, which is another strong level of pricing that will basically support price action when it reaches that point, and it won't fall any lower, at least for a little bit, at least until that level is tested for a while. As you can see, the next major level of price action below where we are now, I've just drawn a blue horizontal line to represent the average, which is basically the middle of the price, which comes out at about 10,500. However, the very top of that price zone would be 12,370, approximately. Obviously, every exchange has got a different price. So when I was getting into crypto back in 2017 and I made all that money in the bull market, one of the reasons why I gave so many of those gains back is because I listened to people when altcoins were dying, altcoin projects that have never bounced back. I listened to people, that told me, to buy the dip, crypto's going to bounce back, everything's going to be gravy, baby, is all going to be good, hodl, all that shit. And projects that I held, projects that I bought the dip on, just died and went lower and lower and lower and lower, and they never came back, and they never have come back. You can look at CoinMarketCap and see in previous bull to bear markets what the biggest, strongest altcoin projects were at the time. And if you go back in every bull to bear cycle, very few of them that really boomed actually survive to the next bull to bear cycle. If you look at like the top 20 altcoins in every bull to bear cycle, I would say at least half of them disappear by the time we get to the next one. So what I would say is, I'm not a financial advisor, this is not financial advice, but if you're not sure what to do right now, I think the best thing to do is absolutely nothing. If you've been holding crypto up until this point, you've already lost quite a lot. So, holding on a little bit longer as we approach this major level support, probably not going to do you too much more damage you haven't already gone through. But this is definitely not a situation, in my opinion, where you should be looking at buying the dip or catching a falling knife or anything like that. I think this is probably just a continuation of a pretty nasty, pretty prolonged bear market cycle for crypto. If you look at the 2017 to 2018 bull to bear market, you know, crypto dipped for like a year to 18 months before we started to see things turn. And obviously, things only really went sour for crypto back in November. We're not even, you know, well, we're just about approaching the 1 year anniversary, right, of when this downtrend began. So I would just wait a little bit, just chill out, you know, don't make any big decisions in the heat of the moment, stay calm, do your own research, and just, just be very careful about listening to people that have extreme opinions one way or the other, because no one really knows where this is heading. But if you take a little bit of time out your day to look, you know, learn about support and resistance, you'll know that most likely, at the very least, Bitcoin is heading towards, you know, 12,400 if the laws of technical analysis are respected here, which they often are. So I don't usually talk about crypto, things like that, even though it's something I'm very passionate about. For the most part, produce gambling related content on this channel. But I hope that maybe helps some of you out, because if you are losing a lot of money in crypto at the moment, feeling that pain, I've been there, man. I've been there myself back in 2017. You know, it was devastating to see all these gains that I'd made bleed away. But at the end of the day, it's only money, and money comes and goes. And if you're able to build wealth, you know, build that money in the first place, you can do it again. It's not the end of the world, man. You know, I see some pretty dark posts on Twitter at the moment from people that have lost everything, you know, lost a lot of money in crypto. It is only money, man. There is more to life than money. Easy come, easy go. And you can do anything you achieved in the past, you can do again, no matter how hard it may seem, no matter how big of a mountain it appears to climb, you can bounce back. So, you know, no matter how down you're feeling in the moment, don't sweat it, man. The amount of times I've been beat up, brutalized, taken big losses, and just been totally kicked in the nuts by the universe every single time, put my boots on, go to work, and bounce back, and just have that attitude, man, and you can get through anything. So, now let's talk about the main event of this weekend, which is going to be Alex Pereira against Israel Adesanya. And let's start off by taking a look at the odds. So if we take a look at the odds on Izzy at the moment, he is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.48, which is going to be minus 208 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Alex Pereira, he is around an average of 2.75, which is plus 175 for an implied probability of 36%. So Pereira is 35 years old, 6'4" with an 80-inch reach. Israel Adesanya, 33 years old, 6'4" with an 80-inch reach. So nothing to really separate these two in terms of the tail of the tape, although they do have very different body types. Even though they've got the same height and wingspan, you know that Alex Pereira is one of these big, powerful, physically imposing marauders, whereas Israel Adesanya is much leaner, you know, much slight, you know, much longer and leaner in his frame. So two very different body types here, and those different body types certainly have an influence on their fighting styles. So I guess the breakdown that I was planning to share with you guys in this video has changed a little bit, because I did bet Israel Adesanya earlier this week when his odds were around 1.57 on most websites. Since betting Izzy myself, his odds have declined a fair bit, and while I do think Izzy wins this fight a pretty high percentage of the time, I think he does very well this weekend, we cannot ignore the fact that Pereira is very dangerous. And so Izzy's odds, with the way that they've declined, they are approaching that range where I think the upside in betting Izzy this weekend is very quickly disappearing. So, you know, if you do want to bet Izzy this weekend based on, you know, your own research and the things that I'm going to share with you in this breakdown, I would say do it now, because if his odds continue to decline, I just don't think you're going to be getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio in the odds. Having said that, I think this is a really good stylistic matchup for Israel Adesanya. I think people are often influenced by violence, exciting fights, big knockouts. People love those big, exciting, quick finishes. And we spoke about this a lot when we bet Islam Makhachev to beat Charles Oliveira, and we said, look, you know, some people perceive Makhachev to be all hype. Some people perceive Makhachev to be boring. And as a result, the odds are heavily influenced by Oliveira's exciting fights and quick finishes. And I think the same thing's happening here. Pereira is a very good fighter, but when you look at footage of Pereira side by side with footage of Israel Adesanya, in terms of MMA striking, Adesanya is just levels and levels and levels above Pereira, which you should expect. Like, that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone, because Pereira's only had 7 pro MMA fights, and Israel Adesanya's had 24 pro MMA fights. And what we often see in MMA is that martial artists, fighters that come from traditional backgrounds, so be it, traditional wrestling, any type of traditional martial art. In this instance, it's obviously kickboxing, with Pereira coming from a kickboxing background. It takes a long time to mold your, whatever background you're coming into the sport in from a traditional background, and make a decent MMA skill set, or mold that into a decent MMA skill set. We spoke about this last week with the Mark Madsen versus Grant Dawson fight, and we were saying, look, on paper Madsen's the better grappler. He's a former Olympian. Dawson's Wikipedia page hasn't got anything as impressive as it on that. But Madsen's MMA grappling isn't very good. He doesn't have particularly good grappling control. His grappling technique just isn't the best. And Dawson is a far better MMA grappler. And we saw that with how badly Madsen got dominated on the ground. I'm not saying Adesanya is going to dominate this fight, but when you look at footage of both guys, while if these two competed in a kickboxing contest, it may be very competitive, I just don't feel Pereira's MMA striking skill set is where it needs to be for him to be competitive with Adesanya. And I will say the same thing about this fight that I said about the Makhachev versus Oliveira fight, in that Pereira can absolutely knock Israel Adesanya out, because he's a big, scary, heavy-handed Brazilian, hits very hard, and if he lands one big shot in 25 minutes, Izzy's going to be in a lot of trouble. But I don't think Pereira can dominate Izzy. I don't think he's skilled enough. I don't think he's good enough. Can Izzy dominate Pereira? Absolutely. Can Izzy knock Pereira out? Absolutely. I think there's a big skill gap here, and I think Pereira's only chance of winning this fight is by knockout. And so in that respect, Pereira really only has a puncher's chance in this fight. And while that may sound derogatory, I understand that sometimes when people say, this guy's only got a puncher's chance, it's kind of a derogatory word to downplay someone's chance of winning, or downplay their skill set. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Pereira, because the guy's an absolute nightmare on the feet. He's got devastating KO power, thunderous kicks, big power in his hands. So the chances of him winning by knockout are significant. But I don't see any situation in which he could win this fight by decision, just because he's not a volume striker. He doesn't throw a big diversity of attacks like Israel Adesanya does. And I just don't think he's going to be able to match the pace that Izzy can put on him. Izzy throws such a diversity of attacks, leg kicks, body kicks, combinations, whereas Pereira, for the most part, just looks to take you out with big singular power shots. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's his style, and that's an effective style for many fighters. It's going to be an effective style for Pereira as he progresses on his MMA career. But Chael Sonnen famously once said, when you try to win a fight by knockout, you often end up losing by decision. Because while you're loading up on those big singular power shots, if you don't land them, you're giving your opponent a lot of opportunity to outpoint you. And that's really how I see this fight. It's impossible to feel super confident in Adesanya this weekend, because like we said, 25 minutes is a really long time to land one big shot, and Pereira has proven to be extremely dangerous on the feet. But I do think Izzy wins this a decent percentage of the time, so I'm going to bet him this weekend. If we look at how they match up on the feet, watching their kickboxing fights is really useful, because for the most part, Izzy did a fantastic job of making Pereira miss. And Izzy only really got into trouble when Pereira came forward aggressively, pressured him, and trapped him, in the corner of the ring or up against the ropes. But that's going to be much harder to do in the octagon, which is a bigger space for Izzy to use his footwork and movement to move around in. And there's no corners in an octagon, right? It's basically like a circle. You can just continue to circle away from your opponent, and Izzy's very good at doing that. He's very good at staying on the outside and playing the role of matador against these aggressive pressure fighters that come forward and load up on big shots. We saw how effectively Izzy was able to fight on the outside against Paulo Costa. Now, Pereira does have obviously a longer reach than Costa, so it will be harder for Izzy to, stay out of a range where he can be hit against someone like Pereira. But I also think Costa's a lot more aggressive than Pereira. Costa's a pressure fighter that forces you to fight in an uncomfortable range. And we haven't seen that kind of relentless pressure from Pereira. He likes to fight in kickboxing range. I'm not saying he won't come in with a lot of pressure against Izzy, but it's just not something we've really seen him do before. So with Pereira, he's got devastating kicks, loads up on big singular power kicks. He's got fast hands, big power in every shot. But I just think Izzy's going to be able to play the role of matador, chip away at Pereira, and outpoint him. That's really how I see this fight going. And while we cannot rule out the possibility that Pereira lands a big shot and knocks him out, we've really got to be very honest with ourselves here and ask ourselves how likely this is. If you look at Pereira's record, he's only had 7 pro fights. And when you look at his past fights, the matchup against Bruno Silva really highlights this. You can see that he is a fighter that kind of struggles to read what his opponent is going to do. If you watch his past fights, when he absorbs strikes, he often reacts to them after they've landed. And this was very, very clear in his fight against Bruno Silva. I don't know if that's because the threat of a potential takedown makes it more difficult for Pereira to read his opponent, because obviously in kickboxing you only need to worry about strikes. So when your opponent changes their body language and is setting you up for strikes, you've only really got to think about one thing. Whereas when grappling's on the table, you've got to think about level changes and takedowns as well. So I don't know if Pereira's reflexes looked a little off against Silva because he was worried about the threat of Silva's takedown, which he possibly won't have to worry about with Izzy. But at the same time, if your reflexes are a little off and your striking defense doesn't look great against Bruno Silva, with how much higher of a level Israel Adesanya is when it comes to striking, with how much more complex Izzy's style is to work out, with his massive diversity of attacks, when you look at Pereira's reflexes and striking defense against Bruno Silva, even if he was slightly off for fear of having to defend a takedown, which he likely won't have to against Izzy, I think Izzy's level is so far beyond Bruno Silva that those weaknesses in Pereira's reflexes and defense will likely still exist this weekend. And I could be wrong on that one, but that's just my feeling on it. Now, before we wrap up this breakdown, we do have to briefly talk about grappling. And obviously, with both these guys predominantly being strikers, we very rarely see either of them take anyone down. You'd expect this to be a stand-up fight and predominantly a kickboxing match. But there's always the potential that one of these guys could flip the script and look to take the other down. This would be a great strategy because it would also get their opponent thinking about something else. We've already spoken about how Pereira's striking defense may have been affected by the threat of Bruno Silva's takedown. Perhaps Izzy will have a lot more success with his striking if he were to shoot some takedowns on Pereira and get Pereira thinking about something different. And the same could be said in reverse if Pereira were to try and take Izzy down. But what I do think is interesting about this matchup is that if there was any grappling, I am tempted to give Pereira the advantage on the ground here. I can't say for sure, but what I do know is that Pereira training every day with a guy like Glover Teixeira, and with his body type, his physicality, there's the potential for Pereira to develop much better MMA grappling than Israel Adesanya could training in New Zealand at a predominantly striking-based gym. And again, that's just an assumption, but I don't think this is one of those fights where either guy is going to have a clear advantage when it comes to grappling. But I don't think either of them, is got anything to particularly worry about either. I think that both of them are quite difficult to take down. Both of them are quite difficult to hold down. So even if one of them were to try and take the other down, they probably would have some trouble doing it, since they're not natural offensive wrestlers. But who knows? We don't know a great deal about Pereira. He's only had 7 pro fights. Maybe he's got some, decent MMA grappling that he's been working on with Glover that we haven't seen yet. And we do know, based on Izzy's fight against Jan Blachowicz, his grappling is a potential big weakness that future opponents can exploit. But all things considered, when you look at Israel Adesanya's record, he's had 24 pro fights and he's never been knocked out in MMA. You look at it and, this guy has faced the best of the best at middleweight. Some big punches, some heavy-handed guys. He's gone toe-to-toe with guys like Robert Whittaker, Jan Blachowicz, Paulo Costa, Yoel Romero. All these guys have devastating one-shot knockout power. And for the most part, no one has really been able to put Izzy in much trouble on the feet. The only guy that has really hurt Izzy on the feet is Kelvin Gastelum, but that fight was a long time ago. Now, of course, Pereira is a lot more dangerous on the feet than Gastelum. But since that Gastelum fight, Izzy has gone through killer's row, and no one has really caused him a problem on the feet. No one has got near him. So perhaps Alex Pereira is going to be the first guy to knock Israel Adesanya out. It's possible. Anything can happen in MMA. But I don't feel it's that likely that a guy with only 7 MMA fights is going to come in and, in my opinion, knock out the best striker in the history of the middleweight division. I just don't see it happening. If guys like Whittaker, Paulo Costa, Yoel Romero, Jan Blachowicz couldn't get near him on the feet, I struggle to see how Pereira is going to be able to go one step better and knock him out. And like I say, if Pereira doesn't win this fight by knockout, I think he loses by decision a pretty high percentage of the time. So for that reason, I'm going to be betting Israel Adesanya this weekend. But you can never feel totally confident when the guy you're betting on is going up against an absolute dog. It's very dangerous. And Alex Pereira ticks both those boxes. But it's a great fight this weekend. Looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Now let's break down a very interesting co-main event between Carla Esparza and Weili Zhang. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds. So Weili Zhang is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.27, which is minus 370 for an implied probability of 79%. We take a look at the odds on Carla Esparza. She's around an average of 3.90, which is going to be plus 290 for an implied probability of 26%. So this is one of those matchups where I still haven't made my mind up on it. The problem that I have with this fight is that I do think Weili Zhang is more likely to win. But as you guys know, our objective is not to just simply identify who is more likely to win. Our objective is to find good risk to reward ratios. Our objective is to identify situations where the odds are inaccurate and find bets where there's good value in the odds. And even though I think Weili Zhang is more likely to win this weekend, this is one of those matchups where both of these fighters, in my opinion, based on past performances, have extreme advantages in the area that the other is weak. And as a result, this fight is very complicated from a betting point of view. Because when you look at the odds on Weili Zhang, which are around 1.27 minus 370, those odds that carry an implied probability of 79% imply that Zhang has no major weaknesses in this fight and has virtually no way to lose. That is simply not the case, for reasons that I'll discuss in this breakdown video. But the thing is, there are some things Zhang does well which are likely to cause Carla Esparza huge problems, and so this is one of those fights where you cannot feel confident on either side, and as a result, if you do want to bet it, it's no doubt that you're getting a better risk to reward ratio on the underdog. It's just a very, very tricky fight to bet for reasons that I'll get into. I need to stop rambling. I just need to talk about why this is a very complicated fight. The way that I'm going to approach this matchup from a betting point of view is that I'm going to wait for the ceremonial weigh-ins on Friday to see how both girls look at the weigh-ins and the stare-downs. Because I do feel that the size and the physicality of Zhang could have a pretty big impact on how this matchup plays out. And the only way for me to get a good read on how much of an impact the size and physicality of Zhang may have is to see these two girls face off. So I'm not ready to make a decision on this one yet. I haven't made my mind up yet. But what I am going to do is share with you all my findings from my research, and then you can do your own research and make your own mind up on this one. I'd also really appreciate it if you guys would leave a comment below, help me out on this one, drop some knowledge, let me know what you think of this fight, and maybe you guys can help me make my mind up as well. I'd also really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button if you haven't already. Makes a big difference to the search rankings on YouTube of these videos. So every time you guys do hit the like button, it really means a lot to me. Let's dive into why this is a very complicated fight. So Carla Esparza is 35 years old, 5'1", with a 63-inch reach, making her one of the smallest fighters by wingspan in the UFC. Weili Zhang, 33 years old, 5'4", with a 63-inch reach. So on paper, both these girls roughly the same, right? They're the same age, same reach, roughly the same size. But we know there's a very big difference in body type. Weili Zhang is big, strong, powerful, muscular, very physically imposing. Whereas Carla Esparza is more slight, more lean, more feminine. She does have that smaller, compact frame, which is one of the reasons why her offensive wrestling is so good. But she certainly can't match the physicality of Zhang. And this is firstly one of the main reasons why I'm finding this fight difficult to bet on, because particularly in women's MMA, physicality often has a huge influence on the outcome of fights. We saw it last weekend with Marina Rodriguez against Amanda Lemos. Lemos, big, muscular, powerful, physically imposing. Marina Rodriguez, more lean, and slight. And we saw that Lemos just overpowered her on the ground and knocked her out on the feet. It is a big deal, particularly women's in MMA. Size matters, physicality matters. And Zhang has an abundance of physical advantages over Esparza going into this matchup. And even though a 3-inch height difference may not look like a lot on paper, sometimes it is. Sometimes there's only a 3-inch height difference, but you'll see two fighters and the taller one has just got a bigger upper body, bigger neck, bigger shoulders, bigger head, and it just makes the fight so much difficult for the smaller fighter. So I really need to see these two face off on Friday. Now, when it comes to striking, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out that Carla Esparza is absolutely doomed. She's got no hope of causing Zhang any trouble on the feet offensively. Esparza has no power in her hands, not the best technique, and we know that Zhang is a marauding berserker on the feet who is very aggressive, has very fast hands, big power in her hands, and is extremely tough. Zhang is the kind of fighter you have to practically kill in order to beat. And she's so game, she's so tough, she is so scrappy that Carla will not want anything to do with Zhang on the feet. And we've seen this from Carla in her past fights, right? Whenever Carla recognizes that she is facing an opponent who can cause her a lot of problems on the feet, she just doesn't engage. She likes to maintain a really, really wide distance between her and her opponent, and she just stays all the way out of a range where she can be hit, circling away from her opponents. And she'll occasionally blitz forward with like a straight punch karate combination to try and back them up a little bit. But that's only really so that she can kind of set up her takedowns so that when she does blitz forward, her opponent won't know if one of those straight punch karate combinations is coming or if a takedown attempt is coming. But make no mistake, Carla will not want anything to do with Zhang on the feet. And this is a fight that Zhang's going to dominate when it comes to striking. Having said that, there are things that Esparza can do on the feet to limit some of the success that Zhang can have. So while I don't think that Esparza can do anything to cause Zhang a problem offensively, I don't see Esparza hurting Zhang on the feet or inflicting damage on the feet, but I do think that she can frustrate Zhang, because Zhang is the kind of fighter who is a little bit flat-footed and doesn't do a particularly good job of cutting the cage off. She's not that mobile. Zhang is very good against people who stand right in front of her in boxing range, that she can use her excellent boxing, fast hands to land big shots and hurt them. The Joanna Jędrzejczyk, or the first Joanna Jędrzejczyk fight, is a great example of this. Both girls went toe-to-toe, and Zhang's superior boxing caused Joanna Jędrzejczyk big trouble. But Carla does a really good job of making herself a moving target. We've already said she likes to maintain a big enough distance so that she can't be hit unless her opponent is really able to pressure her and force her to fight in an uncomfortable range. And we know that Zhang's not particularly good at that, or at least she hasn't been in her past fights. So while Esparza is unlikely to cause Zhang a problem offensively, it is possible she could frustrate Zhang by making herself a moving target and making it difficult for Zhang to land clean, hard shots on her. Zhang is great in exchanges when girls go toe-to-toe and look to exchange with her, but we know Esparza won't do that. She's going to treat the exchanges like the last place on earth she wants to be. So on the feet, Zhang will win, but perhaps Carla can stay alive and limit the amount of damage that she takes with her footwork and movement. Now, when it comes to grappling, this fight gets super duper interesting because there isn't a great deal of footage available on Zhang's takedown offense and ground game. But from what we have seen, her takedown offense is really bad and her ground game's kind of awful. Now, obviously, in her last fight, we saw her use her strength and physicality to just ragdoll Joanna Jędrzejczyk around the octagon. And it's possible that she could do that to Carla because there is a lot of physicality to her game. But when it comes to grappling technique, Carla is levels and levels and levels and levels above Zhang. Carla is probably the best offensive wrestler in the division. She has brilliant timing on her reactive double leg takedowns. And the kind of takedowns that you see Carla throw at her opponents are not the kind of takedowns Zhang is going to be able to stop. Based on Zhang's performances in the past, her takedown offense is just not good enough to stop Carla from taking her down. Now, my biggest criticism of Carla Esparza's overall MMA grappling game is that because she is so slight and so small, her grappling control isn't very good. She's just not that physically imposing on the ground. She doesn't have the heaviest top game. So Carla's very good at taking opponents down, but she's not very good at holding them down. When she hits takedowns, if an opponent knows how to work their way back up to their feet, usually they can pretty quickly, because Carla's just not strong enough to hold her opponents down. Where you see Carla having a lot of top control against opponents such as Zhang Yan and Marina Rodriguez, this is because neither Yan nor Rodriguez, once taken down, made any attempt to get back up to their feet. They kind of just laid on their back doing nothing, and Carla was able to hold both of them down relatively easily and rack up a ton of top control because she just didn't have to do anything apart from lay on top of them. With Weili Zhang, what's interesting is that while there isn't tons of footage on her ground game, she has also looked very, very weak off her back. If you go and watch her last fight against Rose Namajunas, when Rose took her down, she literally just laid on her back and did absolutely nothing. Exactly like what we've seen from Marina Rodriguez and Zhang Yan when Carla fought them. And so this is a really complicated fight because when you look at the lack of physicality and strong grappling control in Carla's MMA game, MMA grappling game, and you look at the power and the physicality of Zhang, logically speaking, if Carla were to take Zhang down, which I would expect her to do with how bad Zhang's takedown offense has looked in the past, then you'd expect Zhang to just be able to stand back up because she's so strong. She's going to be very difficult for someone like Carla to hold down. But the thing is, we haven't seen that side of Zhang. When Zhang has been taken down in the past, she's looked very weak off her back. So there's a real good chance that this fight could end up looking like Carla versus Zhang Yan or Carla versus Marina Rodriguez, where Carla hits takedowns on Zhang, and Zhang just lies on her back and doesn't do anything because she doesn't know how to work her way back up to her feet. Now, when I go over these scenarios in my head, it seems so unlikely, which is the reason why I'm having such a problem betting this fight. Because based on past performances, Carla Esparza at big dog odds is an absolute no-brainer bet. But the nagging doubt that I have in my mind is that Carla Esparza is very one-dimensional and she's a very easy fighter to game plan for. You know you don't have anything to worry about Carla on the feet. You know she's going to try and take you down and lie on you. So Weili Zhang, in preparation for this fight, has got a pretty easy job on her hands because She will know exactly what to expect from Carla. She'll know what she needs to work on. She'll know what Carla is going to try and do. She'll know what Carla's exact game plan and strategy is. And as a result, she can build her entire training camp around neutralizing the threat that Carla brings to the table. And I would have expected Zhang to be working very, very hard on her takedown defense and her ability to work her way back up to her feet. And it isn't a really big deal for me that Zhang has bad takedown defense. The thing I'm most concerned about with Zhang is how weak she's looked off her back. Because we've seen with Carla in the past, if Carla doesn't feel like she can hold her opponent down, she does go into a defensive shell quite quickly and easily. So even if Carla is hitting takedowns on Zhang early, but Zhang is quickly popping back up to her feet, I think with how big and scary and powerful Zhang is on the feet, she's going to put Carla into a defensive shell pretty early into this fight in the first or second round. And then I think Carla will go into self-preservation mode where she'll become even more tentative, even more passive, and then that'll just enable Weili Zhang to run away with the fight on the feet. My concern here with Zhang is that even though it seems illogical that she would show up for this matchup with bad takedown defense and an inability to work her way back up to her feet like she has in her past fights, the issue that I have with Zhang is that she is at that stage in her career where you wouldn't really expect her to improve that much. You would expect her skill set to have plateaued. Because at the age of 33 years old, after having 25 pro fights, if your takedown defense and ground game is still fucking terrible, which quite frankly it is based on her second fight against Rose Namajunas, then why would Zhang suddenly improve it at the age of 33 years old after having 25 pro fights? This has been such a glaring weakness in Zhang's skill set her entire career that why would she choose now to fix it? It just doesn't make that much sense to me. On the flip side, ultimately, Zhang's bad takedown defense and bad ground game is what cost her against Rose Namajunas in that second fight. And so, if ever there were a time to motivate Zhang to improve that weakness in her game, it would be now. Because she has to realize that if she doesn't tighten up that weakness in her game, once again her takedown defense and ground game is very likely to cost her against Carla Esparza. So this is a very, very complex fight. And to sum this one up, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is dog or pass. You would have to be a fucking crazy person to bet Weili Zhang this weekend with how bad her ground game has looked in the past. Ultimately, this is one of those matchups where both fighters have extreme weaknesses in the area that the other is strong. Zhang has an enormous advantage on the feet. Esparza has an enormous advantage on the ground based on past performances. But for all the reasons we've discussed in this breakdown, things get complicated. So this is definitely dog or pass. If you really want to bet this fight this weekend, I would take Carla Esparza. Personally, I'm not sure if I'm going to bet Carla, simply because it just would be so crazy to me if Zhang showed up this weekend with terrible takedown offense and a terrible ground game, knowing what Carla brings to the table and what Carla is going to try and do, especially after those weaknesses cost her against Rose. I just can't get past that in my head. But based on past performances, if we're only looking at what both girls have done in their past fights, and if you said to me that both these girls would show up and perform like they have in the past, I would take Carla in a heartbeat. I am just concerned about potential improvements that we could see in Zhang that we can't account for because we haven't seen them yet. So this is a really complex fight. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Help me out with this one. It's a super interesting co-main event, and I don't think this one's anywhere as clear-cut as the odds suggest. So let me know what you guys think. Let's move on to the next matchup. Speaking of fights where the odds seem a little bit weird, we've got another matchup here between Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler, where, quite frankly, the odds don't make any sense to me on this fight at all. If we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Dustin Poirier is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.45, which is going to be minus 222 for an implied probability of 69%. If we take a look at the odds on Michael Chandler, he is around an average of 2.80, which is plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. Dustin Poirier is 33 years old, 5'9" with a 73-inch reach, and Michael Chandler is 36 years old, 5'8" with a 71.5-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. Obviously, Michael Chandler is very old for a lightweight at 36 years old, but Dustin, there's so many fights, 35 pro fights. He's got a lot of miles on the clock, a lot of wear and tear on that body as well. So he's pretty old for a lightweight with how many fights he's had, how much damage he's taken in his career. And we can also see that Poirier is a little bit taller and has a slight reach advantage as well. If I were capping this fight, I would have both these guys in the even money odds range. I would cap this fight at 1.91 minus 110 apiece. And I really don't understand why Dustin Poirier is a big favourite here. I will be betting Michael Chandler this weekend, and I'm not going to be betting him because I think he's going to win. I don't have any dog in this fight. I don't lean either way. I just think with how these two guys match up stylistically, it is the definition of a coin flip fight and a fight that could go either way. And I don't think either of these guys should be a big favourite. So if the odds were reversed and Dustin Poirier was a 2.8 plus 180 underdog, I would bet Dustin Poirier as well. I don't lean either way here. But remember what I said earlier on in this video. Our goal is not to pick which fighter is more likely to win. Our goal is to identify discrepancies in the odds and find odds where there's good value. Find situations where we can get our money into a favourable risk to reward situation. And for me, Michael Chandler is an absolute gift at 2.80 plus 180. The reason why I really like Michael Chandler in this fight is because all I see in this matchup is chaos and violence. I just think it's going to be an absolute war. Both guys refuse to take a backward step. Both guys are extremely dangerous. Both guys have got big knockout power. And both guys are pretty bad defensively as well. We've seen Dustin Poirier rocked, dropped, wobbled, knocked out so many times in his career. And the same could be said for Michael Chandler. I'm not saying that these guys are chinny or anything like that. But because they're so game, so tough, so scrappy, they love to get into big exchanges, and they always bet on themselves and their chin and their ability to take a shot over their opponents. And because of that, they take a lot of damage and they get dropped a lot. So where we're going into this fight, and we know that both guys are very dangerous and very bad defensively, for me it's just an absolute no-brainer to take the underdog. For some reason, there is a perception within the MMA community that is baked into the odds here, that Dustin Poirier is some kind of durable, granite-chinned, striker who's solid defensively. And I can tell you that's just not the case. If you go back and look at Poirier's career, he absorbs a lot of big shots. I mean, go and look at his fight against Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker was very, very close to knocking Dustin Poirier out in that fight. I mean, Poirier was kind of saved by the bell. Poirier also took big damage against Charles Oliveira. He did look great against Conor McGregor. But before that, we've seen Max Holloway inflict big shots and hurt Poirier on the feet. Poirier is a guy that does take big shots. And we know Michael Chandler has got an absolute nuclear bomb in his right hand. Both these guys are very dangerous. And I've got, no doubt that Poirier is the superior striker when it comes to technique. He's a dangerous southpaw. He's got very good boxing combinations, fast hands. He's far more technical than Michael Chandler. A criticism that I've got of Michael Chandler on the feet is that he is a little bit of a one-trick pony. For the most part, all you see Michael Chandler do on the feet is pump the jab and then follow through with a big right hand. But the thing is, he's so aggressive, he's so reckless, he covers distance so quickly and commits so hard to that right hand that when he lands it, which he often does, he's going to cause you big problems. So if this were a sparring match where both guys are going to go, in the middle of the octagon or in the middle of the ring, wherever, technique for technique, have a nice, boxing sparring session with head guards on, Dustin Poirier would probably outclass Chandler because he's by far the more technical boxer. But we know with the way these two guys fight, this is likely to be chaos and violence. And both these guys are very dangerous. Both of them are very reckless. And in that type of fight, I think technique means very little. Because ultimately, no matter how much more technical Poirier is, no matter how much better defensively he is than Chandler, ultimately, when Chandler commits hard, comes forward, covers distance very quickly, and loads up on that right hand, he's very accurate with it. And it's very difficult to, be very technical and make good decisions in the heat of the moment when you're in Madison Square Garden, sold out arena with 20,000 fans screaming. The energy in the octagon is going to be electric, right? The whole stadium's going to be a pressure cooker. And now you've got a crazy person in Michael Chandler coming forward at the speed of light trying to take your head off. I just think superior technique is probably not as important in a matchup such as this as it would be against, someone who is more willing to just face you in the middle of the octagon in a nice technical boxing match. Chandler's chaos, and he ain't going to look to play nice with Poirier. He's going to look to take his head off. And with how many times we've seen Poirier rocked, dropped, wobbled in his career, I think Chandler's got a pretty good chance of doing that. I will also say that I do think out of the two, Chandler is more likely to dig deep and survive when the going gets tough. I think both these guys are very capable of hurting the other and knocking the other out. But with Poirier, I do feel like we've seen him cave and quit in fights in the past. I believe he kind of gave up in his last fight against Charles Oliveira. He landed some big shots on Oliveira in round 1, adrenaline dumped, waved the white flag and kind of gave up in round 2. We saw him kind of do the same thing against Khabib as well. There's no quit in Michael Chandler. We've seen him get knocked out. We've seen him get beaten. We've seen him quit. No doubt about it. And yes, he did have that weird, moment in one of the Will Brooks fights where he didn't know where he was and he signaled to the referee that he was done. But for the most part, Chandler is an absolute warrior. No quit in him. And the kind of guy that you have to practically kill in order to beat. He will keep fighting till his last breath. We saw the amount of damage that he took against Justin Gaethje. And for me, this counts for a lot. Because if this fight does turn into a war, if it does turn into chaos, if both guys are tired and beat up and hurt, I trust Chandler to dig deep, pull through, and survive in that kind of fight a lot more than I think Dustin Poirier will. Talking about specific techniques and paths to victory that I think both guys can have, which again kind of highlight the fact that I do think this fight should be in the even money odds range, and I don't understand why either of them is a big underdog. Let's start off by talking about Dustin Poirier's leg kicks, which are fantastic. We saw how much trouble Poirier gave to Conor McGregor using leg kicks, and leg kicks were, I guess, the key to victory for Dustin Poirier in those fights against McGregor. This is a significant weapon that Poirier can use against Michael Chandler because Chandler is very susceptible to leg kicks. We've already spoken about Chandler being a little bit of a one-trick pony on the feet where he measures distance with a jab and then follows through with a power right hand. And Chandler's also one of these guys that stands in a wide stance but also very heavy on the lead leg. Doesn't really check leg kicks, doesn't really read leg kicks particularly well. And we've seen past opponents cause Chandler big trouble with leg kicks. I mean, Brent Primer stopped him with leg kicks. So the leg kicks of Poirier are a significant weapon that he can use to cause Chandler a problem in this fight. However, while Chandler is this crazy, chaotic, reckless guy who just initiates total war in his fights, we also have to remember that he is a former NCAA Division I level wrestler. And Michael Chandler has very, very good offensive wrestling, good chain wrestling, a heavy top game, good grappling control. And one thing that makes Chandler's MMA grappling very special in my opinion is that this guy inflicts major damage with ground and pound. He is extremely nasty in top position. And you don't usually see Chandler wrestle unless he finds himself in a lot of trouble in fights. Usually Chandler will only go to his wrestling after he's been hurt. But it is very interesting to me how this is a big fight, a big opportunity. It seems like the winner of this fight is being positioned towards getting, a title shot pretty soon, or a big fight against Conor McGregor. And Chandler will know how big of an opportunity this is. Dustin Poirier is a good grappler, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But if these two were to get into a wrestling match, a grappling contest, I would heavily favour Chandler. We saw in Dustin Poirier's last fight against Charles Oliveira that Oliveira was able to get him down pretty easily in round 2, and Poirier was very, very weak off his back, just laid on his back doing absolutely nothing. I love Charles Oliveira. He's a very good MMA grappler, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. But at the end of the day, he does have a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And if a BJJ guy like Charles Oliveira can get someone like Poirier down and hold him down easily, then you'd imagine that a former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler like Chandler can also do the same. And with Poirier, on the ground on his back against Oliveira, he didn't have a lot to worry about in terms of sustaining damage in that position. Of course, he had to be very careful in defending himself against submission attempts from Oliveira, but Oliveira is not the kind of guy that will just smash you from top position like Chandler will. So if Poirier does find himself on his back underneath Chandler, he's likely to take a lot of damage, and he's likely to be worn down very quickly, having to carry Chandler's body weight on top of him. So I do think Chandler's grappling is a path to victory for him here, which I don't feel is baked into the odds, and I don't feel many people are taking that seriously. Perhaps Chandler flips the script on everyone this weekend, comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, causes Poirier big trouble, and makes his makes his claim for the next title shot, or a shot at Conor McGregor. Very interesting matchup. So from a betting point of view, I think Chandler's a fantastic bet this weekend, but it's not a confident bet. Like I say, I don't lean towards either guy here. I think this is a 50-50 fight. If I were capping it, I'd have both guys 1.91 minus 110, and if either of them were to be a big underdog, I would take them, because both guys have got things they can do to cause the other a problem. As it happens, Chandler's the big underdog, so I'm taking Chandler. But it's a great fight. I'm expecting pure violence. This has got Fight of the Night written all over it, and I can't wait. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Now let's talk about the next fight on this main card, which is Chris Gutierrez against Frankie the Answer Edgar. Let's start off by taking a look at the odds. So Chris Gutierrez is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Frankie Edgar, he is around an average of 2.80, which is going to be plus 180 for an implied probability of 36%. So Frankie Edgar was the first name that jumped out at me as a potential bet on this card, because I couldn't believe that he was an underdog to Chris Gutierrez. Frankie Edgar is a former NCAA Division 1 level wrestler and has built his career from being a really strong MMA grappler with the ability to spam takedowns and grapple hard for 3 rounds. We've seen in Chris Gutierrez's past fights that his takedown defense is very bad and his ground game is non-existent. So when I saw that Frankie was a big underdog in this fight, odds of 2.80 plus 180, I honestly couldn't believe my eyes. But this fight is a really good example of why doing fight research is so important, because your mind will play tricks on you. I was assessing Frankie Edgar's chances of winning this fight and assessing his strengths and weaknesses based on hazy memories, and your mind, like I say, will play tricks on you. So important to do fight research when betting MMA, because your brain will visualize things and assume things that are no longer true. And when I went back and researched Frankie Edgar's last few fights, I was blown away by how much he had declined. And a lot of the things that Frankie built a career off, a lot of the things that he's done well, a lot of the things that I was banking on him being able to do well this weekend to cause Chris Gutierrez absolute hell, unfortunately, based on recent performances, he can no longer do. And that shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone with the stage of the Frankie's career that he's in. He's 41 years old, 5'6" with a 68-inch reach. Gutierrez, 31 years old, 5'9" with a 67-inch reach. So while Gutierrez will be a bit bigger than Frankie in this fight, he's also 10 years younger. And we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time. That is such a strong trend to bet against when we know that the younger fighter is going to win such a high percentage of the time. We're taking on a big risk whenever we bet the older fighter. Now, I never like to bet against strong trends like that, but if the older guy does have a particularly good stylistic matchup in front of him and they're the underdog, I will take a shot on them. And I thought that's what we might have with Frankie. But I don't think that's the case. I really don't think that's the case for reasons I will explain now. So when it comes to striking, I do think the UFC have done Frankie a solid here. Because when you look at Frankie's performances over the last couple of years, you can see that his reflexes just aren't there anymore. He can't see the shots coming. He looks fragile on the feet. He definitely can't take a shot like he used to. He is a sitting duck to the knockout. Frankie, when he's striking, really looks like a fighter to me that has lost confidence in his ability to take a shot. And I think a lot of the time, this is a big part of the reason why a fighter's chin goes. I think we've kind of seen it with Cody Garbrandt, where when you've suffered a lot of knockouts in a short space of time, your brain starts to feel that, a knockout is going to happen. And then when you eat a big shot, your brain will shut itself off easier, which will lead to more knockouts. Your brain will just shut itself off to try and protect you. And while that's total bro science, it's just something that I've observed anecdotally, betting this sport for 14 years. So when you look at a guy like Frankie Edgar, he isn't going to want to engage with Chris Gutierrez on the feet. But the UFC have done Frankie a solid because Gutierrez isn't that dangerous on the feet. Gutierrez is more of a volume striker. He's not the kind of guy that is going to land that one big shot that knocks you out. Of course, Gutierrez has won fights by knockout in the past. Of course, he caught Dana Batgarel in his last fight with a spinning back fist. But if you look at Gutierrez's record, for the most part, he's a decisionator. He's a point fighter. He chips away at you and breaks you down on the feet with volume. So while Gutierrez will have a big advantage over Frankie Edgar on the feet when it comes to striking, at the same time, it's not like Frankie's facing a guy with big knockout power that can land a big shot and put him away. Gutierrez isn't really like that. The UFC have also kind of done Frankie a solid here because Gutierrez's boxing isn't particularly good. We know that usually if you get knocked out, it's through a big power punch landing. But for the most part, Gutierrez's style of striking is kicks based. His boxing isn't very good and he doesn't really have much power in his hands. Gutierrez breaks people down with brilliant leg kicks, brilliant body kicks, but these are obviously not the kind of techniques that would usually lead to knockouts, which is the reason why Gutierrez has gone to a decision so many times in the past. When you look at Gutierrez's style of striking, it also makes him vulnerable to the takedown because one of Frankie's biggest ways of getting fights to the ground in the past has been reading kicks, jumping on leg kicks, body kicks, and turning them into takedowns. And because Gutierrez throws so many leg kicks, so many body kicks, if Edgar starts to get the read on Gutierrez's timing with those leg kicks and body kicks, I could see Frankie turning a lot of kicks into takedowns. But on the feet, because of how gun-shy Frankie is, because his reflexes are shot, I don't think he's going to want to engage with Gutierrez all that much. I think you're going to probably see Frankie, striking a lot like Carla Esparza, where, he may launch blitzing attacks every once in a while at Gutierrez, but for the most part, he's going to want to stay out of a range where he can be hit and look to win the fight with his grappling. And this is where the matchup gets very interesting, because if you look at Gutierrez's past fights, Gutierrez is very good at stuffing the initial takedown because he's got good balance and he's athletic. He's also a pretty high-level striker, so he's good at reading those takedown entries. He's good at seeing them come early and clearing his hips, getting his legs out the way of the incoming shot. So Gutierrez, good initial takedown defense. But then if you start to persist with a takedown and chain wrestle, Gutierrez's takedown defense is pretty bad. So what's interesting about this matchup is that Frankie built a career off applying relentless pressure and chain wrestling very hard. And so for that reason, Frankie's got the skills to maybe not get the initial takedown on Gutierrez, but to drive him into the cage, work for those takedowns, and eventually get him. And what we've seen from Gutierrez in the past is just no ground game at all. He just doesn't do a particularly good job of working his way back up to his feet, and he's very, very weak off his back, very, very low-level ground game. So if Frankie's able to get this fight to the ground, he should destroy Gutierrez on the ground, rack up a lot of top control, do a lot of damage, and it's going to be all Frankie. Just like striking is all Gutierrez, on the ground, it's going to be all Frankie. The question is whether Frankie can get Gutierrez down and keep him on the ground for long enough to make it count. And this, I guess, is where my optimism for Frankie's chances of winning this fight started to wane a little bit. Because what I noticed in his recent fights is that he doesn't seem to have much confidence in his ability to grapple hard for 3 rounds anymore. We've seen throughout Frankie's career that he's an absolute cardio machine that will just apply relentless pressure and a relentless pace to his opponents. But he can't really do that anymore. At 41 years old, Frankie does slow down a lot as fights wear on, and he becomes increasingly flatter as fights wear on. And when he becomes flatter, his grappling becomes a lot less effective. I've also seen that Frankie is a fighter that doesn't really persist with his takedowns or chain wrestle very much anymore. Frankie is much more of a single shot wrestler who will shoot that initial takedown entry, and then if you shut that takedown down, if you neutralize that takedown, he'll kind of retreat, wave the white flag, go back to kickboxing range. It's almost like whenever Edgar gets in close to his opponent in a range where he can be hit, he starts to freak out a little bit in case, you know, he were to get knocked out again or take damage, and as a result he retreats on takedown attempts very easily. And this is a problem because we've already said Gutierrez is a young, hungry bull with good balance. He's athletic and he's very good at stuffing that initial takedown attempt. Frankie needs to chain wrestle in this one and grapple very hard in order to get Gutierrez down and keep him down. And that's not something that we've seen Frankie do for a very long time. You know, we have seen Frankie rack up a lot of top control against guys like Marlon Vera, but that was in situations where Frankie shot a takedown, Marlon gave the takedown up very, very easily. If Marlon were to resist the takedown a little bit more than he did, that fight likely wouldn't have been so one-sided for Frankie up until the point that he obviously got knocked out. So this is a super complex fight, and a fight that I am going to stay away from. I don't like betting on strong trends, such as the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. And in order for me to bet on an older, declining fighter like Frankie Edgar, you know, it needs to be a really, really good stylistic matchup for them. And I don't feel performances over the last few years suggest that it is that favourable of a matchup for Edgar. If the Frankie from 3-4 years ago was showing up this weekend, he would probably ragdoll Gutierrez and dominate. And while it is possible that that could happen this weekend, you know, I have a lot of doubts as to whether it's still possible that at 41 years old, Frankie can perform like that. But if ever there were a time for Frankie to do it, it would be this weekend. This is a fight in his hometown, sold out Madison Square Garden Arena. He's on the main card of a big card, and he's announced that this is going to be his retirement fight, his very, very final fight. We often see fighters in this situation lose. I've been betting on this sport for 14 years now, and I can count on one hand the amount of times I've seen fighters win their retirement fights when they announce beforehand that they are retiring. It very, very rarely happens, which is another strong trend that I do not want to bet against. And we very rarely get happy endings in MMA, but if there were a time to get a happy ending, it would be this weekend. Madison Square Garden, Frankie Edgar, UFC legend, hometown fight against a very beatable opponent with a very good stylistic matchup in front of him. If Frankie can roll back the years and find some of the form and athletic ability we saw from him just 2, 3, 4 years ago, he could give Gutierrez absolute hell this weekend. So from a betting point of view, if you really want to bet this fight, it is dog or pass. I would not touch Gutierrez here as a big favourite. It would be very foolish to bet Gutierrez because ultimately you never want to be betting guys at big favourite odds that have big weaknesses that their opponent are potentially well positioned to exploit. With Frankie having a strong base in grappling, with Gutierrez being very bad on the ground, it would just be very foolish to bet Gutierrez as a big favourite. On the flip side, there are a lot of strong trends going against Frankie. He's announced this is his retirement fight. He's 41 years old. We don't usually see guys win, you know, in those situations. But I do still think this is dog or pass. And if you do want to bet this fight, Frankie's going to give you the better risk to reward ratio. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Hit the like button if you appreciate these breakdowns. And let's move on to the final fight on this main card, which is Claudio Puelles against Dan Hooker. And don't forget, if you really like these breakdown videos and you'd like to watch breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card, head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com, link in the description below. On there you'll find breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card. Let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, and we can see that Dan Hooker is a favourite at average odds. I mean, we've got a pretty big odds spread here, but we will say average odds of around, call it 1.63, which is going to be minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Claudio Puelles, he is around an average of 2.30, which is going to be plus 130 for an implied probability of 43%. So Puelles is 26 years old, 5'10", with a 72-inch reach. Dan Hooker, 32 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75.5-inch reach. So nice size and reach advantage there for Mr. Hooker. So this is one of those matchups where I do feel the odds may be heavily influenced by results on paper. As you guys know, if you watch my content, I put very little weight on results on paper. They don't mean a great deal to me. The thing that I rank the highest is the skills displayed in the octagon, and I think that's the only thing that really matters. You see a lot of these guys that put up breakdown videos, a lot of these guys that analyze MMA talk about, oh well, Hooker's coming into this fight on a 3-fight losing streak, and Puelles is coming in on a 7-fight winning streak, and and they don't really say anything. They don't really talk about how both guys match up stylistically. They just kind of wiki cap, and for me, that's a very lazy way of doing things that will not produce very good results long term. There is no doubt that both these guys are heading in opposite career trajectories. You know, Hooker definitely on a decline. You know, he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. Puelles is on a good winning streak. He's younger, he's hungrier, he's developing. He's going to be improving at a rapid rate compared to Hooker, who's probably declining or plateauing. But at the same time, I do feel that this is likely one of those matchups where even though both these guys are on different career trajectories right now, Hooker has probably not declined to the point where a guy like Claudio Puelles is going to be able to beat him. And I say that based on past performances. I think these odds are heavily influenced by results on paper. And when you look at Puelles' record, very impressive coming into this fight on the back of a 5-fight winning streak. But the way I would look at this is, if Dan Hooker fought any of these guys, he would probably be on a 5-fight winning streak as well. Like, if the records were reversed, they'd probably be exactly the same. Hooker would likely be 5-0 against these guys. And if Puelles would have fought Dustin Poirier, Chandler, Makhachev, Arnold Allen and Nasrat Haqparast, well, instead of being 1-4, there's a pretty good chance Puelles would have been 0-5, because I don't give him a particularly good chance of beating a guy like Nasrat Haqparast. Point being, just because Hooker's record doesn't look good on paper, that a big part of that is down to the guys that he's been facing. Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Islam Makhachev, Arnold Allen, absolute beasts. Arnold Allen, potential future champion. Makhachev, the lightweight champ. Chandler, Poirier, two of the best lightweights to ever do it. And so this fight for me is an opportunity to find a decent amount of value in betting Dan Hooker this weekend, with wiki capping and results on paper artificially skewing the odds from where they should be, in my opinion. I think Dan Hooker's better than Claudio Puelles everywhere, and while I can't deny that he is declining, I just don't feel that he's declined to the point where a guy like Claudio Puelles is able to beat him. I will also always say to you guys, do your own research and, you know, figure things out for yourself. And a fight that I would highly recommend you watch if you're thinking of betting this fight this weekend is Claudio Puelles versus Chris Grushmacher, which took place just under a year ago and is the last time that we got a really good look at Puelles, with this fight ending in just 3 minutes. And when you look at the fight against Grushmacher and then you go and watch, you know, one of Hooker's fights that lasted a decent amount of time, you can just see that these guys are several levels apart. So I do like a bet on Hooker this weekend. I think he's better than Puelles everywhere. When it comes to striking, I think Hooker's better defensively. I think he fights longer. I think he throws a more diverse range of attacks. Claudio Puelles is a very meat and potatoes kickboxer. Doesn't have too much power in his hands. There's nothing flashy or special about his striking. Hooker's got a great jab. He can do big damage with his leg kicks. You know, deadly knockout power. And I just think Hooker's going to be too skilled for Puelles on the feet. Now, Puelles is primarily a striker, but we've seen him use a lot more grappling in his recent fights. And of course, this is one of Hooker's weaknesses. Hooker's takedown defense isn't the best. He's not the best off his back. But for me, when you look at the ground game of both guys, when you look at what Hooker was able to do with Hackrast, when you see into the second and third round against Grushmacher how Puelles at times was struggling to get the takedown, didn't look that strong on the ground. I think if Puelles were to get this fight to the ground, Hooker would be able to defend himself reasonably well and work his way back up to his feet reasonably well. And I wouldn't rule out a very strong possibility that Hooker is actually better than Puelles on the ground. I know Puelles has hit some nice submission wins recently, but Hooker's pretty decent on the ground as well. And I could see Hooker putting on a grappling clinic like he did against Nasrat Haqparast, taking Puelles down, just kind of dominating him on the ground. We don't know for sure because, you know, Puelles is one of these young guys. He is making big improvements from fight to fight. But I just feel that Hooker is so far above the guys that Puelles has been fighting recently that if fighters like Grushmacher can have a little bit of success against Puelles on the ground, someone as skilled, as high level as Hooker can go one step further and really cause Puelles problems. So I think this is one of those matchups where the UFC are using Hooker as kind of like a gatekeeper to see if Puelles is ready to take that next step, you know, towards the top 15, top 10. Obviously, if he beats Hooker, it's a big win. But I just don't feel Puelles is ready for that step yet. He might get there, but based on his fight against Grushmacher, I don't feel he is. It's a pretty good stylistic matchup for Hooker. I will be betting him this weekend. I think he does pretty well. It's possible that he could decline very rapidly. His athletic performance could fall off a cliff and maybe he gets caught, finished, looks awful. It's very possible. Happened against Arnold Allen, but again, Allen is so much better than Puelles. I like Hooker in this fight. So I hope you found that breakdown video useful. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you haven't already. It would mean a lot to me. It helps boost the search rankings of these videos a lot. And also subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you very much. And I will see you next week for another breakdown. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.